Here we go. Welcome to Old Testament History, Chapter 5, Session 4b, Nehemiah, the Model Leader. I should have died when I was 12. Our family was on one of our nature trips in cave country, Hocking County in southern Ohio. My father was a self-taught photographer, scientist, ecologist, and ornithologist, and he had us kids with him at one of the state parks in that area, and we were on a nature hike on a trail that went around the upper rim of a canyon. And the autumn rains had started and were pattering down the colored leaves of the trees into a slippery mat that covered the trails. And there was me. I lagged behind the rest of the family by about 50 yards. They were up around a bend, and I was by myself. And for some stupid reason, I wanted to look over the edge of the cliff. Suddenly I slipped on the wet leaves, and I started going over the edge. It was more than 100-foot drop to the rocks below and certain death. But somehow, I stopped sliding. Spread-eagled, laying there on the edge of the cliff, I took inventory of my young life, and in that moment, I didn't care. I didn't care if I died, because I had been so tormented by bullies that I had no reason to live. But unexpectedly, I was still living. Why? Why was I still alive? Why was I spared? I had slid over halfway over the rounded edge of the cliff. I should have fallen. But something had stopped me from going over. As I scrambled back up to get on the trail, there was a question burning in my mind. Why? Why am I still alive? Am I supposed to accomplish something in my life? Is there a reason why I was spared? That question put me on a path to where I am today, a minister for God. He spared me because he had something he wanted me to do. And after that point, when he saved me, I belonged to him. I was to fulfill his plans. I think Darius the First, the king of Persia, had a similar question. Because you remember what happened when he won that contest that made him the choice to be king of Persia? We know that his horse neighed first. But what I'm talking about was that there also was lightning and thunder. So, having had similar, obviously, heavenly intervention in my life, I can't help to think that maybe he had a similar question. Why? Why was there lightning and thunder that morning of September 29th, 522 BC? Why had God intervened in Darius's life? I think he wondered, am I supposed to do something great? Yes, Darius the First may have started out as a typical Gentile, barbaric, ruthless king. But he ended up marrying a beautiful believer, Esther. Do you think maybe there were some godly influences afoot in the Persian court? Were the angels still working on the prince of Persia, like they were a few years earlier when Daniel was in Babylon in the opening years of the Persian kingdom? I think maybe so. A few months before Darius married Esther, Ezra was sent with a royal charge to go to Jerusalem and teach. Well, how'd that happen? Was Darius the first somehow influenced by God's team? You know, the team had been functioning in the halls of power in Babylon and Persia since Nebuchadnezzar, and that had been for 90 years. How did King Darius know about Ezra, who was a Bible scholar in Babylon, to have sent him to Jerusalem? Daniel probably was no longer living, but I think his influence persisted. I think that there had to be other members of God's team, unmentioned in the annals of history, but their names shine in the golden indelible ink of the book of life. Mordecai, a believer, was an elder in the king's gate, it says in the book of Ezra. And Mordecai was on God's team. How long had he been there in that position? Darius I had decreed that the temple construction restart in the latter half of his second year. Had Mordecai been there then? He was there a year later when Vashti the queen was deposed and Esther was taken in to the king's harem. The book of Esther says that Mordecai was, quote, in the king's gate. Therefore, he was part of the Persian court. How did he get there? I'm going to read to you an excerpt from worldhistory.biz titled Ceremony and Etiquette of the Royal Audience. And here it talks about the King's Gate. The King's Gate is a genuine Near Eastern expression, and it gives the Akkadian words and the Hebrew words. It actually refers to an imposing building, always a short distance from the main palace. The term, nonetheless, became a synonym for the palace and court as a whole. Those of the gate was likewise a kind of court title, like it's mentioned in Esther 2:21 and 3:2. Just as in the Ottoman world, the term, the Sublime Porte, referred to both the physical palace gateway and the court itself. At Periopolis, Xerxes, Gate of all nations, with its huge bull figures, serves its purpose as the magical portal between the brutal outside world and the rarefied universe of royalty. While at Susa, the gateway was flanked with over life-size statues of Darius I, which perhaps served a similar magic religious function as the Periopolis bull figures. The gate was a place where all supplicants and petitioners waited for an appointment with the monarch. They were questioned by security there, and only after satisfying the guards were they admitted into the courtyard and beyond. Here, messengers, including eunuchs, conveyed missives back and forth between the courtyard and the audience hall. Bryant, scholar, notes that in the Parthian period, every visitor to court had to give his name, homeland, profession, reason for visiting, and all this information was written in a register along with a description of the person and his clothing. This security and administrative policy probably already existed in the Achaemenid court. So that's where Mordecai was. I'm going to give you another PDF on the Persian royal court. In this document, it mentions some of the other officials of the Persian court, including the cupbearer. Nehemiah was a cupbearer. This was a very high position, occupied by a very trustworthy person. They basically were chief of security. The courts of kings throughout the world were rife with conspiracies and intrigues. Assassinations were common, and one of the favorite methods was via poison, because you could get away with it. It wasn't a direct confrontation. The cupbearer monitored all food and drink served to the king, his family, his highest officials and guests. They sampled the food to make sure it was safe and oversaw serving drinks and meals. So they were in the king's presence continually. There are even sculptures of Persian kings seated on their thrones with the cupbearer standing right behind them. Since the cupbearer would pour the wine and serve it to the king and his guests, they heard conversations, and therefore they knew many secrets. Therefore they had to be very trustworthy and keep secrets. Also, because they knew such things, they often were asked for their advice. Nehemiah, a member of God's team, was in that office for King Darius. We know that it was Darius and not Xerxes or Artaxerxes because of Wren's teaching on the throne names and because of the confirmations that were established by the ages of Ezra and Mordecai. So it can be none other than Darius the First. So now we're going to pick up the historical record again in the book of Nehemiah. So please turn to Nehemiah chapter 1. We're going to learn about Nehemiah and how he was the model leader. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hachaliah. It came to pass in the month Chislew, in the 20th year, as I, Nehemiah, was in Shushan the palace, that Hanai, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I, Nehemiah, sat down and wept and mourned certain days, and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And this is the first trait of a model leader. The best leaders are men and women of prayer. And we know prayer is not a one-way street. It was during this time that God showed Nehemiah what he wanted him to do. Verse 5. And I said, I beseech thee, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, that keeps covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. Let thine ear now be attentive and thine eyes open, that thou mayest hear the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee now day and night, for the children of Israel thy servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against thee. Both I and my father's house have sinned. We have dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which thou commandest thy servant Moses. So, Nehemiah made intercession. And that, like Ren just taught in the earlier session, confession of sin is important. That intercession. And that is a job that leaders must do for their people. Very important job. Moses and Aaron and Samuel were very good intercessors, and we can add Nehemiah to that list. Verse 8, remember, I beseech thee, the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, if you transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. That was in Leviticus 26. But if you turn unto me and keep my commandments and do them, though there were of you cast out into the uttermost part of heaven, yet will I gather them from hence, and will bring them unto the place that I have chosen to set my name there. Wow. Ren and I did not discuss and plan what we were going to teach. We just told each other what we were going to teach. And look how it fits. That's just tremendous. Verse 10, now these are thy servants and thy people, whom thou hast redeemed by thy great power and by thy strong hand. O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant and to the prayer of thy servants, who desire to reverence thy name, and prosper, I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. For I was the king's cupbearer. Well, mercy in the sight of this man. What's he talking about? He was intending to go before King Darius and ask him something. The book of Nehemiah is an example of genuine leadership. Nehemiah, being the cupbearer, was a witness to the top leadership of the most powerful kingdom in the world at that time. Darius I also was known as a competent administrator. And by now, the Persian Empire's policy of cultural and religious tolerance had matured into the philosophy and principles which allowed it to succeed and last for almost 2 centuries. So, we're going to see a consummate leader in action in Nehemiah. He was the best, both in worldly leadership and tempered with godly principles. So, in the book of Nehemiah, I'm going to point out the things a leader must do. Okay? What the leaders must do and what the leaders must be. Therefore, this book is a model for anyone who wants to be a leader. Because who is a leader? How does one become a leader? Some say leaders are born. Others say leaders are made. As usual, it's some of both. In his book, Life is Tremendous, Charles Tremendous Jones declared that anyone could be a leader, because a leader simply was anyone who took the initiative to begin any task. That's who a leader is, the first one. They're out in front. But there are principles involved. A leader must have authority. Nehemiah's authority came from the king, but he also was responsible. I'm going to include a PDF for you on authority and responsibility. Authority is the power to make decisions and give orders and enforce obedience. Responsibility is the obligation to answer for one's actions and to complete assigned tasks. These two are intertwined. And the best leaders have a combination of both Responsibility without authority is slavery. Authority without responsibility is tyranny. So the best leaders have a combination of both in balance. Another cardinal principle in leadership is regarding the necessity to delegate. And this works from heaven on down, because, God has the power to do everything himself. He could have run this whole thing himself. He's the creator. He's the first cause. He's infinite. However, God chose to delegate authority. Right? All the hierarchy of the angels, etc. But I want to make sure we don't get these confused. Authority can be delegated, but responsibility and accountability cannot be delegated. Because a leader is responsible or accountable to his superior for both the tasks that he has assigned his subordinates and the acts of his subordinates. God, being the ultimate authority, is accountable to himself. Another facet of delegation is self-actualization. That is the reciprocation of delegation. When someone is entrusted with something and they accomplish it well, that enhances their self-esteem. It gives them a sense of fulfillment, which makes them more confident to take on the next steps. So, God created things with that kind of interest in our individuality. Satan and his worldly methods of leadership use people. God, in his methods of leadership, build people. Satan's worldly methods dominate and micromanage. They make workers miserable. God invites his servants to buy in to the things they're doing and have their hand in making decisions and leaving their mark on everything they do. Because the leader is responsible, they must have due diligence to oversee, to plan, coordinate, communicate, serve, exemplify, enforce, verify, reward, and report back. Because the leader is an example to be honored, they must be honorable. So not only must they be wise, but they also must have integrity, be equitable, charitable, fearless, flexible, focused, undaunted, and humble. These are all the qualities, the virtues of leaders who lead God's people. And they are not soloists. They're conductors of a chorus, conducting the music of the believers' souls. We shall look for these things in Nehemiah. I recommend that anyone who aspires to leadership not only read Nehemiah periodically, but meditate upon it to glean the principles therein. Chapter 2, verse 1 of Nehemiah. It came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Now, before we get to that sadness, there's a bit of chronological evidence here. In verse 1, it talked about the month Chislew, Nehemiah 1:1, the month Chislew, and that was mentioned being in the 20th year. Then here in chapter 2, verse 1, it says that later, that same 20th year, something happened in the month Nisan. Now, the 12 Hebrew months are, the first month is Nisan or Abib, second month Iyar or Ziph, third month Sivan, fourth Tammuz, fifth is Av, then the sixth is Elu, then the seventh month is Tishri or Ethanim is another name for it. Eighth month Heshvan or Marchesvan or Bull. Ninth month Kislev or Chislu. Then 10th month is Sebet, 11th Shavat, and the 12th month is Adar. So, Chislu came before Nisan, but it was still in the 20th year. Well, how's that work? Well, the only way that would work is if the months or the years in the book of Nehemiah were Tishri to Tishri years. Okay? That's how the ninth month followed by the first month would still be in the 20th year. It's interesting. Now, also more information on months. The lunar months, these months were lunar. They were by the phases of the moon. And they were then, like the moon's period, are alternating 29 and 30 days, because the period of the moon around the earth is 29 and a half days. So, the odd months of Nisan, Sivan, Av, Tishri, and Shavat were always 30 days long. The even months, Iyar, Tammuz, Elu, Tevet, and Adar, were always 29 days long. But the 8th month, Heshvan, and the 9th month, Kislev, were either 29 or 30 days in length, because of making up time, I guess. Also, they had a leap year. Now, we have leap years where we have one extra day. But their leap years, because their months were shorter, they were lunar months, their leap year had an extra month, not just an extra day. And in their leap years, there was a second Adar, 12th month. The first Adar was always 30 days long. The second Adar was always 29 days when it occurred. Their leap years happened 7 times in a 19-year cycle, because the number of days on the lunar and solar calendars match every 19 years. And then the phases of the moon occur on the exact same days of the year. That's called the metonic cycle. Somebody figured that out in, 500 BC or something like that. So, if the 9th month of Nisan coming later were said to be in the same year of the king, that means the book of Nehemiah is reckoning dates by a Tishri to Tishri calendar. Now let's get back to he was sad in the king's presence in verse 1. Now verse 2. Wherefore the king said to me, why is your countenance sad, seeing you're not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then Nehemiah said, I was very sore afraid. Well, why is that? Because he had broken protocol. The king's court in Persia was very ordered with all kinds of protocol. And because it was always party time around the king. And actually, it was a capital offense to be sad in his presence. Therefore, rule number 1 of the Persian court was, don't bum out the king. So this was a capital offense. He could be executed for being sad in the king's presence. Well, the king said, and I said, Nehemiah said to the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city and the place of my father's sepulchres lies waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? And then the king said to me, for what dost thou make request? He knew Nehemiah, because Nehemiah worked with him. He talked with Nehemiah a lot, being the cupbearer. Nehemiah worked around him all the time. For what dost thou make request? So Nehemiah said, I prayed to the God of heaven. The leader must have faith, that's for sure. And I said to the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wilt send me to Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. He had already thought this through. Remember, he prayed for days, right? God told him what to do. But he had to be bold at this point and honest. Because, you know what? He could have said, oh, it's nothing. I'm sorry. But he was bold enough to tell him. And God already given Nehemiah the plan. And he'd already thought it through. Because preparation also is a trait of leaders. And preparation is an act of faith. You know, we don't live carelessly and hope God will protect us. Preparation is not acting on fear. It's a reasonable response. I mean, did we learn anything about from the COVID pandemic? About preparation? You know, we built a raised garden in our back yard and still use it. We had an action plan. We had a month's supply of food in our pantry. Do you have those things? Do you have an electric generator for your house? Do you have a safety kit in your car? You know, blankets and flares and stuff like that. I mean, what if your city got flooded? Are you ready to pack up a few things and leave for safety? I mean, what if a tornado or an earthquake hit? Does your family have a plan? Do you have an evacuation plan from your house? Do your kids know how to get out of their window if there's a fire in the house? Do you have an alternate meeting place? Are there other believers nearby? Do you have a way of checking on them? You know, such things are not fear-based. They're intelligent preparation. Now, I'm not saying that you buy a year's supply of survival food or run off to the woods and build a cabin and live off the land or something. I'm talking about reasonable preparations for your family's safety. That's part of leadership. Look at verse 6. And the king said to me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. He set a time. Good leaders have goals. You know, they're not wishy-washy or imprecise. Also, the phrase, the queen sitting by him, that's great. Because there must be a reason why that detail is there. It's not mentioned very often like that in the Word. The reason is that this queen was Esther. Yay! God's team was functioning in the Persian court. I think that's why this all happened. Verse 7. Moreover, I said to the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river. He thought it all through. God given it to him, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah. So, he had thought things through. He was practical. Verse 8. And a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into.
And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Then I came to the governors beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had set captains of the army and horsemen with me. So here Nehemiah is walking in wisdom, because he already knew what happened before, right? When the Samaritans tried to thwart them from building the temple. This is after that. He knew he was going to encounter pushback from those Samaritans. So he had captains of the army and horsemen with him. He came with letters of authority and symbols of authority. Captains of the army and cavalry. All of those were symbols of royal power. And he was one of the highest officials in the land. Verse 10. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. So I, Nehemiah, came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do. See, I told you, God told him what to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast I rode on. So Nehemiah was wise. He didn't reveal his plans. He went to see the situation for himself. He didn't take anyone else's word for it. Verse 13. Then I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Now, the stones were still there in the rubble. They just were dismantled and pulled down. Verse 14. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain, to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so I returned. And the rulers knew not where I went, or what I did. Neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, or to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. So again, he was walking in wisdom, because he didn't know who were friends or enemies yet. Remember, he was very security-minded. He was the chief of security of the Persian court. So, he had to do it on the sly, because, here he is. He comes into town, the very high official from the Persian court, with an honor guard of soldiers. Everybody's eye was on him. What's he here for? Verse 17. Then said I unto them, you see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told him of the hand of my God, which is good upon me, and also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let's rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. So a leader also is a good communicator and a good motivator. And of course, when they heard they had guidance from God and the king was behind them, they must have been overjoyed. But, verse 19, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that you do? Will you rebel against the king? Then I answered him and said to him, the God of heaven, he'll prosper us. Therefore we as servants will arise and build, and you Samaritans have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Wow. He put them in their place, didn't he? Nehemiah was fearless. It's another trait of leaders. The Samaritans had tried to thwart the building of the temple, which had been completed 12 or 13 years before this point. How do I know for sure? Because the next name we read in the next verse, chapter 3, verse 1, that name is Eliashib. He's the high priest. And he rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they built the sheep gate, sanctified it, set it up, the doors of it. Even under the tower of Mia, they sanctified it under the tower of Hananiel. The high priest genealogy documents that Eliashib was Jeshua's grandson. Jeshua was the high priest when the temple was reconstructed. So we know the chronology is right. Verse 2. Next to him built the men of Jericho. Next to them built the Zaccur, the son of Imri. But the fish gate did the sons of Hasaniah build, who also laid the beams thereof, and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. So then, the rest of chapter 3 goes all the way around the city, describing who repaired what. See, Nehemiah had delegated authority. Each family built their own section of the wall that was opposite where they lived. That also ensured their diligence, because they had to repair properly, because they were ensuring their own protection for their family that lived nearby. Chapter 4, verse 1. Came to pass, when Sanballat heard that we built the wall, he was wroth, took great indignation, and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria, and said, What do these feeble Jews do? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish that are burned? So the stones were still there. Okay? And they weren't small bricks. They're about 1 cubic foot stones. I'm going to give you another PDF on Nehemiah's wall. And it talks about that they have proof that this was formerly Hezekiah's wall. And Hezekiah's wall was about 5 meters wide, about 16 feet wide, 16-foot wide wall. You could walk on top of it. Archaeologists have uncovered large portions of it that have survived to this day. All right? So this is the wall that Nehemiah repaired. So I'll give you a paper on Nehemiah's wall. Chapter 4, verse 3. Now, Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, Even that which they build, if a fox goes up, he'll even break it down, their stone wall. No, it won't. And so what did Nehemiah do when he heard that? He said, Hear, O God, our Lord God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach upon their own head. Give them for a prey in the land of captivity, and cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. For they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So what was Nehemiah's response? He prayed. Leaders, like I said, are men and women of prayer. Chapter 4, verse 6. So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together under the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. You know why? Because of Nehemiah's leadership. He did everything right. So that's why it's important, I think, if you want to be a leader, read Nehemiah over and over. Verse 7, But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth. And they conspired, all of them together, come and fight against Jerusalem to hinder it. Now, do you have neighbors who are your enemies and are conspiring to thwart you at every turn? I hope not. But wait a minute. Isn't Satan doing that? Yeah, he is. So even though you might not have physical neighbors like the Samaritans, there are spiritual things going on. So we need to be aware. Don't be naive. Nehemiah was determined, but he also was flexible. And he prayed. And he was tapped into God, and he got the information he needed when he needed it. Like it says in James, if you lack wisdom, ask God to give to all men liberally, and He upbraids not. He doesn't say, you're so dumb. No, He doesn't do that. He gives to men liberally. You know what? In that list of sonship rights that are in 1 Corinthians 1:30, do you know what also is in that list? Wisdom. We have as much right to God's wisdom as righteousness and sanctification and redemption. Our Lord won those things for us. So if you need wisdom, ask God. Chapter 4, verse 9. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them night and day because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed. There's much rubbish, so that we're not able to build the wall. And our adversary said, they're not going to know or see till we come in the midst of them and slay them and cause the work to cease. So all these rumors are flying around, trying to get Nehemiah to be afraid. Verse 12. And it came to pass, when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said to us 10 times, from all the places whereupon you return to us, they'll be upon you. Yes, they're going to be there. And the Samaritans tried to frighten them. Therefore set I, Nehemiah said, in the lower places behind the wall, and on the higher places where I could be seen. I even set the people after their families with their swords and their spears and their bows. They were armed. You want to disarm the populace? You better be prepared for the adversary, because that's who moves in. Anyway, they were in families, made sure they would be faithful and courageous, because they were protecting their own family. Verse 14, and I looked and rose up and said to the nobles and to the rulers, to the rest of the people, be not afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and awesome, and fight for your brethren and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your houses. So Nehemiah, he told them, he was a good communicator. It came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the work, everyone to his work. It was just a big bluff. Verse 16, came to pass from that time forth that the half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears and the shields and the bows and the habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Israel. They that which builded on the wall, and they that bare the burdens, which those that laid it, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. Whoo! For the builders, every one had a sword girded by his side, and was so built. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me, because they were prepared, they had planned. So if you hear the trumpet, everybody assemble there. Verse 19, and I said to the nobles and to the rulers and the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from the other. In what place thereof, therefore you hear the sound of the trumpet, resort thee thither unto us, and our God will fight for us. So we labored in the work, half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Now verse 21 has another important piece of chronological information, because when did the Hebrew day begin? We were told it began at sunset. Well, now, exactly when is that? Is it when the sun touches the horizon? Or is it when the sun disappears below the horizon? But what if there's a mountain to the west? Okay, when's the day begin? Well, actually, the day began when the stars appeared. That's about 15 minutes after sunset. Because, they don't have any light pollution there like we have in our cities. But about 15 minutes after sunset is when the first stars, plural, appear. And that would happen whether there was a mountain to the west or not. Now, this is very important because it determined exactly when the Sabbath began. Because then, they were supposed to stop work. No work could be done. All right? And that fact figures very importantly in the burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ and when he was raised from among the dead. That occurred, I believe, Saturday night in that period between sunset and when the stars appeared. Because remember, he wasn't crucified on Friday. You can't get 3 days and 3 nights between Easter Sunday and Good Friday. You can't do it. He died on Wednesday and was raised on Saturday. He was the original Saturday Night Live. It's live from Jerusalem. It's Saturday night. Anyway. But this figure is very important because the Word said he would raise the third day. So, Wednesday night to Thursday day, that's day 1. Thursday night to Friday day, that's day 2. Friday night to Saturday day, that's day 3. And Saturday day ended when the stars appeared that night. So he still got up the third day. You see how important that is? Interesting. Anyway, back to Nehemiah. Chapter 4, verse 22. Likewise, at the same time I said to the people, let every one of us with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard unto us and labor on the day. So, a lot of these people lived in other cities and had come to Jerusalem to do the work. And he said, don't go home at night. Stay here. Stay overnight in the city. Verse 23, so neither I nor my brethren nor my servants nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving everyone put them off for washing. Yeah. Take a bath once a month whether you need it or not. No, I'm just teasing. So anyway, now a new problem arose. Chapter 5, verse 1. And there was a great cry of the people, all their wives, against the brethren the Jews. For there were that said, we our sons and our daughters are many, therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there that said, we've mortgaged our lands and our vineyards and our houses, that we might buy food because of the dearth. There were also that said, we've borrowed money for the king's tribute, for taxes, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now is our flesh as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to buy them back, to redeem them. For other men have our lands and vineyards. And Nehemiah was very angry when he heard their cry. And I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers and said to them, you're exacting usury, interest, every one of you his brother. And I set a great assembly against them. So, a good leader is equitable, honest, fair. And I said to them, we after our ability have redeemed our brethren, the Jews which are sold into the heathen, and will you even sell your brethren? Shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace and found nothing to answer. So I said, it's not good that you do. You ought to walk in the reverence of God, because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies. I likewise and my brethren, my servants, might exact of them money and corn, I pray you. Leave off this usury, this interest. Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, their houses, and also the 100th part of the money, and of the corn and the wine and the oil that you exact of them. And they said, okay, we'll do that. Well, Nehemiah was the representative of the king. They had to do it. So, he took care of that problem. See, chapter 6, verse 1. Came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I built the wall and that there was no breach left therein, though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates. Then Sanballat and Geshem came unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do mischief. And Nehemiah said, Oh no, you don't. And I sent the messengers unto them, saying, I'm doing a great work, so I'm not going to come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? So, don't let anything distract you from what God's called you to do. Yet they said unto me 4 times after the sort, and I answered to them after the same manner. Then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in like manner the 5th time with an open letter in his hand, so everybody could read it, wherein was written, It's reported among the heathen. And Gashmu said it, Thou and the Jews think to rebel, for which cause thou buildest the wall, that you may be their king, according to these words. Well, was that true? No. And thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, There's a king in Judah. And now shall it be reported to the king of Persia, according to these words? Come now, therefore, let's take counsel together. Then I said to them, saying, There are no such things done as you say. You made them up of your own heart. Because Nehemiah knew that King Darius trusted him. Those guys were messing with the wrong man. He had come with the blessing of the king. Chapter 6, verse 9. For they all made us afraid, saying, Their hand shall be weakened from the work, that it not be completed. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. So again, he's a man of prayer. Afterward I came into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delilah, the son of Mehet-Tabeel, who was shut up. Must have been sick or something. And he said, Let's meet together in the house of God, within the temple. See, the temple already existed at this time. And let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee. Oh, yea, in the night, they're going to come and slay you. And Nehemiah said, Well, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that being as I am would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. He was fearless. And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him. But he pronounced this prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. Ooh. Therefore was he hired, that I should be afraid, and do so in sin, that they might have a matter for an evil report, that they might reproach me. My God, think thou upon Tobiah and Sanballat, according to these their works, and on the prophetess Noadiah, and the rest of the prophets that would have put me in fear. And then, chapter 6, verse 15. The wall was finished in the 25th day of the month, Elul, in 52 days. Wow. If they had done the same thing today, it would have taken 52 months. You know, a classic picture of the 6 guys standing around and one guy digging. Well, you know, his manager says, well, I'm supposed to watch him dig, make sure he does it right. And then his boss says, well, I'm supposed to watch his manager, watch him to make sure he does it right. So then what are the other guys doing? Well, just a minute, they're discussing it. So anyway, chapter 6, verse 16, came to pass that when all our enemies heard thereof, and all the heathen that were about us saw these things, they were much cast down in their eyes, for they perceived that this work was wrought of our God. Moreover, in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came unto them, for there were many in Judah sworn unto him. So even though Nehemiah was there doing all this, the Samaritans had allies even among them. Ooh, because he was son-in-law to Shechaiah, the son of Ariah, and his son Johanan had taken the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. So they intermarried with the Samaritans. Big no-no. And they reported his good deeds before me and uttered my words to him. So spies. And Tobiah sent letters to put me in fear. Now it came to pass when the wall was built, and I had set up the doors, and the porters, and the singers, and the Levites were appointed, that I gave my brother Hananiah and Hananiah, the ruler of the place, charge over Jerusalem, for he is a faithful man, and reverence God above many. And I said unto them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun be hot. And while they stand by, let them shut the doors and bar them, and appoint watches of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, every one in his watch, and every one to be over against his house. Now the city was large and great, but the people were few therein, and the houses were not built. Well, see, this is what that verse of Bullinger says, that the walls were built before the temple, but we covered that in a prior session. So chapter 7, verse 5, and my God put into mine heart to gather together the nobles and rulers and prophets, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. So we covered this too in a prior session. It's a flashback, the original group that came. Let's see here. Chapter 7, verse 73. So the priests and Levites, porters and singers, and some of the people, and the Nethinims and all Israel, dwelt in their cities. And when the 7th month came, the children of Israel were in their cities. Chapter 8, verse 1. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate, and they spoke unto Ezra the scribe. Now see, this is still part of that flashback where he did the census of everyone that came at the first. So after this incident, then it flashes forward again to the current time. We covered that also in a prior session. And so after this is when the nobles confessed that they'd taken foreign wives, and they made that covenant. So let's see here. What do we have in the time left? They had a big celebration when they had the wall fixed. They made their oath and their covenants. And let's see here. We'll finish up here, chapter 12, verse 47. And all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel, he was the first governor, and in the days of Nehemiah, he was the second governor, gave the portions of the singers and the porters every day his portion, and they sanctified the holy things unto the Levites, and the Levites sanctified them unto the children of Aaron. Chapter 13, verse 1. And on that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever. It was a rule, what they were told, because they met not the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them, that he would curse them. Howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. Chapter 13, verse 3. Now it came to pass, when they had heard the law, they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. Chapter 13, verse 6. But in all this time, I, Nehemiah, was not at Jerusalem. See, he had done his task, and then he went back to be with the king. All right? I was not at Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, came I unto the king, and after certain days obtained I leave of the king, and so we went back. Now, here it says, this is the king of Babylon. I was asking Ren about this because of the throne names with Artaxerxes. And so, until Darius became Artaxerxes, Darius ruled Babylon. All right? He was over Babylon. So, I think that maybe it mentions Babylon because as high king over both Babylon and Persia might simply be God's choice of emphasis to conclude the doings of God's people in Babylon. That's what Ren says. This Artaxerxes is Darius, and the 32nd year. He was there in the 20th year, He came and did the work in Jerusalem. Then he went back, and the 32nd year. So he was the cupbearer in that position for quite a while. So God's team functioned for years in the kingdom of Persia. We also know that in the 12th year of Darius is when
Mordecai
became the Grand Vizier, the vice president of Persia, the second most powerful person in all of the kingdom. So, you think God's team got stuff done in Persia? I think so. And it was because of leaders like Nehemiah. So, my encouragement to you is, if you would like to become a leader, meditate on the book of Nehemiah. It's just oozing with principles from the Word. So, bless you.